The city of Santiago de Compostela in northwestern Spain is a fascinating blend of historical and religious tourism. According to the legend, in the year 844, St. James, Santiago in the Spanish, appeared on a white horse brandishing a sword and inspired the Christians as he led them to defeat the Moors and drive them out of Spain. So since that time, people from all over Spain and all over Europe and indeed all over the world come to Santiago for various reasons. Some are spiritual seekers on pilgrimage, some are just religious tourists, some are historical tourists, and some are simply on holiday. It's a beautiful part of the country. And they converge oftentimes in the large plaza in front of the Cathedral of St. James that was built over the place where his remains are reposed. And as all of these people from all over come to the community, there are locals who seek to make a living from this. There are some we will call street artists who dress up in costume as various religious figures and saints, and they gather about the plaza and in the streets around the community so that for a couple of euro you can have your picture taken with St. Peter. So one morning when Michelle and I were in a small grocery store in the old city, who got in line behind us but Jesus himself? And by the way, those images of Jesus with a lamb, it's a collie. So naturally, I wanted to check out and see what Jesus was buying. So I peeked in. He had a loaf of bread, a nice, round, healthy, hearty loaf of bread, which I happened to notice was not unleavened. It was fully leavened yeast bread. And a 2-liter bottle of Coca-Cola, full on with caffeine and sugar. So if we get some changes to Eucharist coming down the pike, don't be too surprised. Wine and wafers might be on the way out. But I pondered this a little bit, that age-old cultural linkage that we have with bread. And to say that the ancients valued bread is a gross understatement. Bread was life. If you had it, you lived. If you didn't have it, you died. It was that simple. And so our scriptures are filled with references to grain and wheat and bread. And it helps us if we understand the context in which the first writers would have written them and the first readers would have understood them. Bread, wheat, grain was life. And when we encounter these in our scriptures, it helps if we know that they're talking about life itself. This morning in our liturgy, we encounter 2 such references. The first in the gospel we just proclaimed together. We have the rich man who stores up all this grain in barns and then dies that very night. And in a little bit, as we celebrate Eucharist together, we have Jesus breaking the bread open and passing it around before he dies the next day. Of course, these references aren't about the bread or the grain. They're about life and death. And they challenge us with this question. We have such a short time to live, so few days that we breathe the air. What are we doing with it? What are we doing with this life that we've each been given? In the parable that Jesus gives us of the rich guy, He takes the grain and he stores it in silos to serve his own comfort and security. How often do we do that? How often do we have great intentions for later? Yeah, we'll bake cookies for the single mom down the block and her kids. We'll go visit the widow across the street and spend some time with her when we get around to it. We mean well. We will volunteer at the pantry or drive for Meals on Wheels when we can find the time. And of course, so often we die before we ever live that life. We have the great intentions, but we store them in barns and silos until it's more comfortable for us. And then we have this image of Jesus taking the bread, his life, breaking it open and passing it around to all of the people he was with. Was he tired and exhausted? Absolutely he was. Was he frightened? Yup. Did he wish that cup would pass? You bet he did. And yet he did it anyway. He did it because he believed, and he invites us to believe, that that is the way to live. To reach down, dig in, open our hearts, and pass our lives and our love around for everyone else. That's where we find happiness. That's where we find enrichment. That's where we find joy. The contrast between the parable of the rich man in the gospel and the example of Christ in the Eucharist challenges and changes our very understanding of greed and generosity. It's not simply about the material wealth or our time or our talents. It's about all of those things and so much more. It's about our lives. It's about what we do and how we live on a daily basis. When we get up each morning and tie our shoes and pour our coffee and enter the world, which mindset are we carrying forth? Are we people of intention, or are we people of action? Do we mean well later, or do we do something meaningful now? Are we protecting and preserving our own comfort and security, or are we challenging the very boundaries of our own comfort zones and reaching out to touch the lives of one another? We are the wheat. Our lives are the bread. Do we store them in barns? Or do we break them open and share them abundantly with everyone?